Hello everyone, my name is Sarafi and I'm happy to meet you all. And today we are going to be talking about the internet. I did not plan to do any work on my birthday, but this isn't really work. I mean, not even more than work already is. So I work at an ISP and I provide tech support for people. And I get stupid questions all day long, which is perfectly fine. That's what I get paid to answer. But what could be cool is if I made a video where I answered all of the stupid questions beforehand so you guys could understand the basics of how the internet works, what the internet is, what to do if you don't have internet, etc. And I'm not trying to be rude to you guys or anything. You don't know anything and you shouldn't. I mean, what do you care, right? But it's actually a lot simpler. The internet is very, very simple to understand. So I feel like in the next 20 or so minutes, I could explain literally everything to you guys. And then you could take that knowledge with you for the rest of your life. So hopefully this is beneficial to you. Let's get started. So there are two types of internet. There's coax and there's fiber, which coaxial and fiber optic. Those are the two types of cables that can bring an internet connection into your home or your business. For the most part, unless you are an enterprise, you will most likely have a coax connection. Fiber optic is newer, it's not available in every area, and it's very expensive. So coax is, if you go outside, by the way, everything that I say is going to be related to the United States. I don't know how other countries do things. If you go outside and you look around, you will see telephone poles all over the place. Now, it's important to understand, these telephone poles are owned usually by power companies, electric companies. And the reason why you don't have cable providers like ISPs use their own poles is twofold. Number one, everyone needs electricity, but not everyone needs internet, and more importantly, different houses are allowed to use different internet connections. Power companies, for some reason, for the most part, are allowed to be monopolistic. They, like, if you go into one area or another area, it will usually be one power company that's providing power to basically the entire area, which is why power outages affect a lot more people than one ISP's internet outage. But so since one power company tends to provide a connection to an entire area, it makes the most sense for the power companies to invest in and build the poles, because they're going to use literally all of them. That one company is. Then you have the cable companies who come in and they connect their cables to those poles so they can get a connection to the same people, because you can't have cable connection without without electricity. So you have to have power to get cable, so it makes sense that you would follow the same poles. Also, we don't really want, 3 sets of poles out. The sets of poles that we already have are very, they take up a lot of space, they're very distracting, so it's nice that we have a system where these two companies can share poles. Now, if you look at an actual drop, you have this connection from the street, and it runs down to your home or your business. Generally speaking, you're going to have a cable coming from the street in the air, unless you have a really long driveway or parking lot, in which case they might bury it underground, and that's normal. There's going to be a little bit of a drop, like a sag, which is important for allowing the cable to have a little bit of slack, just a little bit, so that it's not tight and easily snappable. But you don't want the cable to be hanging too low, obviously, because then a car could rip it off. So if your cable comes loose but it doesn't get snapped completely, then you want to get someone out there to fix it. Here's the thing that I want to bring up with you guys. Since there are power in internet cables on the same poles, sometimes it can be difficult for you to know who to call if one of your cables gets low but doesn't snap. Obviously, if the cable snaps and your power goes out, then you know it's a power cable. If your cable snaps and the internet goes out, you know it's an internet cable. But what happens if the cable is just low? How do you know who to call? It's important that you know, because some companies First of all, no company can work with a cable that's not theirs. If you call your ISP, let's say you work with Comcast. If you call Comcast, they come out there and you ask them to hang up an electrical cable, they're going to say, no, that's not our property. We could get in a lot of trouble if we do this. And they usually don't have the equipment for it either. So what you want to do, and the other thing is, depending on the company, if you call the wrong company and they come out to your business or your home to do something for you, and you don't actually have any work for them because you called the wrong party, they might bill you. So you definitely want to avoid that. So the easy way to tell this, let me see if I have another diagram. One second. This will work. Okay. Take a look at this. This is how most poles look. You have a bunch of cables up here on the top, and then some cables down here lower. Now this is how you can tell whose are whose. So remember, who owns the pole? Usually it's the power company. Okay. So when you have the power company come out and install the pole, they're going to put their cables on it. What would make more sense? For the cable that goes on first to be higher or lower? Here's the thing. If you were trying to hang this cable up here and there was a cable already right here, your ladder would be against this. Or depending on how low it is, you know, it could, if this was a little bit higher up, you could even, like, your stomach could even be against it while you were like hanging this other cable. Very dangerous, and it could often cause snapping. So that makes no sense at all. So the cable that goes up first is the cable that's going to be higher up. So power company owns the pole, the power cables are the ones that are up top. Then the internet, phone, and TV cables are down here in the middle. That's how you can tell whose is whose if a cable is low. Just look at whether it's the higher the cable or the lower cable. Now, that's not going to help you determine whose it is if there are multiple cable companies at one building. That's why I recommend that you don't do that. If you need internet, if you need TV, and if you need a phone, I recommend that you get the same company for all of them. It'll be easier for you. You'll be able to manage it a lot better. I understand that, you know, if they have an outage, you'll be impacted all three ways. But if you have a cable that comes down, you definitely want to be able to call the same company. I think that it's better for you to know who to call if one of your cables is low hanging or snaps than it is more convenient for you to avoid having a total outage of your services occasionally. All right, so that is that. Now, speaking of outages, let me explain what an outage is. So you know how sometimes you'll get a notification saying, hey, there's an outage in your area. Well, there are a few potential causes of that. The one that people are most familiar with is the weather. So, you know, obviously, if there's like water, if there's storms, if there's wind, then this can damage infrastructure. And that could make the internet slower. It can make the internet go in and out, or it could make the internet stop working entirely. But there are two other potential causes for an outage. Number one is power. I told you that if you don't have power, you can't have internet. So obviously, if the power goes out at your place, you're not really worried about the internet. You're like, well, what's going on with my fridge? What's going on with my lights? But did you know that if the power goes out somewhere else, you can lose internet? So, for example, every internet service provider has a hub, which is an area, like a building, where they generate the internet connection and then they send it out through all these cables. If that location loses power because of a storm or because of some other issue, internet will be cut off to the entire area. Internet, TV, and phones will be cut off to the entire area, because if that place doesn't have electricity, they can't do anything. You might ask, shouldn't they have a generator? Well, most of them probably do, but this can still cause problems. I don't know exactly why. I don't work at a hub, but I do know that I've seen plenty of hubs get impacted by power loss, and that has resulted in an outage. There we go. So the other thing, the most common cause of an outage, not storms, not power outages, the most common cause of an outage is damage. So Someone's driving, they're an idiot, they don't respect the rules of the road, they blow through a red light, and someone hits them. And then those two cars crash into a pole. Okay, pole comes down. Now the cable is down or it's been snapped. That means that everyone in the area has no connection, because this pole is necessary to get internet from the hub to everyone beyond it. So this causes problems. And then there's also, I told you that some cables are buried underground. If someone's digging and they don't dial 811, which is 911 is how you get emergency services, but 811 tells you where to dig. It's a government-run phone number. And if you dial 811 and you don't get, you don't take the time to figure out where you need to mark, where you need to keep yourself, to avoid things, you could dig into a cable, and if you snap the cable with your shovel, then yeah, the internet's going to go out. So most outages are caused by people outside of an ISP's company damaging ISP equipment. And then they have to run new cables, and that takes hours. So it's unfortunate, but it's not really in their control, just so you understand. All right, that's an outage, and that is how the cables get connected. Let's take a look at what a cable looks like on the actual pole. So the coax cable connects, you have a little loop outside the building, then this comes into a drop, which runs, and you might think, okay, so there's the cable from the street. Does that go into my wall? No. The reason why the cable from the street does not go into your wall is because what if there are more businesses at your location or more apartments at your home? One cable is not going to be able to provide connection to all of those people. So the cable goes into something called a tap, which is inside of a pedestal. Let me get an image of a pedestal. This is what a tap is. It's like usually they're green and they're locked, they're closed, you guys can't get into them, and you might see them outside of a building or all the time, like in the back. And inside of it, there's going to be a tap. And what does a tap look like for you guys? This is a tap. So you can see there are, in this case, 8 connections. So essentially, you would run the cable into the back of the tap, and then once you do installation into a home or a business, you would connect another cable on the other side of the tap where all these connections are, and run this into the wall. So this tap could feed 8 different units, and then each individual unit gets one cord from the tap to go into their wall, which feeds the outlets. Cool. All right, so that's how the connections outside work. Now, let me explain what all this means. So what does this do for you? How does this give you internet connection? So, when someone comes and installs internet at your location, they run a wire from they run a drop from the street to your pedestal. If you don't have a pedestal, they'll install one for you. Usually pedestals get installed as part of like constructing a new building. So we get calls all the time from contractors who are saying, hey, I'm building a building at this address, can you come and install a pedestal? Like that usually gets done before people even get to the building. So then we'll run a drop to the pedestal, and then once we've run a drop to the pedestal, we will then connect one line from the tap into your wall. Once we've done that, we activate a certain number of outlets, which we do as part of the installation. Let's say that you're getting phone and internet. You need 2 outlets in that case. We'll activate one outlet for the phone and one outlet for the internet. Now, the coax is stupid. The coax feeds a connection into your building. That connection is as strong as it needs to be. And then your device that's plugged into it will filter that into whether it is TV, internet, or phone. A cable box will take as much power as it needs to get channels and then convert them into channels. Whereas a phone will use a little bit of internet. Phones and every device uses cable connection. Phones and internet connection are very, very similar. They're just very different speeds. A phone call only takes about, at most, 16 megabits per second to go through, unless you're using a voice over internet protocol phone, which you shouldn't. And then internet usually, it depends on how fast you need it. Dial-up connections can be very terrible. If you have broadband connection, depending on who you have, you could get like 25 megabits per second or 1,000 megabits per second. I've heard of places, certain places around the country, even going up to 2,000 megabits per second for the download speed. But it depends on what's available in your area and what your business needs are or your home needs. All right. So once you have all of the construction done, then you get a modem. So there are two types of devices that you need to know about for your home: modems and routers. A modem looks like this. This is the device on the left here. It's going to have like a power button most likely, and then it's going to have some indicator lights. And depending on who you get it from, the indicator lights will look some way. Then the router is going to look more like this. Let me see if I can zoom in again. Modem, router. You see how the router has a bunch of Ethernet ports. So the modem most likely will only have one Ethernet port because it's designed to give it connection to one device, which is usually your router. And then you see the router over here has LAN 4, 3, 2, and 1, and then it has another Ethernet port that's a different color that says Internet. So that's important. The Internet port is going to be the input device. So that is what you get internet from. And then the LAN ports are going to be output devices, what you take the internet that you already have and distribute it for. So these are different based on the router. You will see that usually the internet or the input port for a router will either be labeled Internet or it will usually be labeled WAN, W-A-N, which stands for Wide Area Network. And then you have LAN, which is Local Area Network. So that's going to be your connector cables. And so the LAN cables go into like your computers, your printers, your PlayStation, whatever you're going to connect to. Cool. So that's the difference. Well, that's what the two devices look like. Now let's talk about the differences between them. Okay, so a modem. What is the point of a modem? You will usually get a modem from your internet service provider. They will usually rent it to you, and that's like a fee to use the connection. Some companies allow people to rent or buy their own modems. You should talk to your internet service provider before you make that decision. Okay, so a modem, what the point of it is it takes the connecting from outside, the connection from your wall, and it translates it into what you need to know to get internet in your connection. Basically, modems are a bridge that tells the internet service provider that you are actually allowed to access their internet. So because they are running cables everywhere and they don't want people to steal their connection without paying them, they scramble the internet connection. The internet connection is unusable without a modem that they approve of, either one of their own modems or a modem that you told them you are going to use that they activate based on the MAC address. So if you just get if you just go to a store and you buy a modem without telling anyone and you hook it into your wall, even if you have internet connection like from a provider, even if you're paying for it, it's not going to work. You have to, if it's not their modem and you didn't tell them and have them activate it for you, it's not going to give you any sort of internet connection because they are the ones that are gatekeeping that internet to make sure that they get paid for it. Once you have a modem plugged in, either from the provider or one that you bought that you told them about, the one Ethernet port on the back of it will be activated. You could plug a computer into the back of the modem and then get connection that way, but usually that will only work if you only need one device. So a church might do that because they usually only need one computer, but for the most part, like a home or a business will want a router to give wireless connection to phones or to printers or to thermostats, all sorts of devices that need to get connected. And so you get routers from either your internet service provider can provide you a router. Usually that's an additional charge. But if you get your internet service provider to provide you a router, they'll fix it for you. If it goes bad, they'll replace it or repair it. If you buy your own router, it'll be cheaper because you pay a one-time charge, usually somewhere between $50 to $100, depending on how much you're spending. But But well, I mean, unless you're a business, and if you're a business, then you could be spending like 350 to even I think even $700 for some routers. You shouldn't do that, by the way. You don't need a super expensive router unless you're unless you have like a managed service provider who recommends like a specific device to you. But if you're just like a small business that's owning and operating, I've got some recommendations for you later. Um, uh, so that's how you hook your modem into your router. Your router will give you a connection, and then you're off to the races. Any device that you get connected will be able to access the internet. Uh, the difference between modems and routers. Modems provide a dynamic IP address to one device, and that dynamic IP address is going to be what's called a public IP address. A public IP address is an IP address that you use to interface with the internet connection. How do I explain this? Okay. When you go out onto the internet, you enter a command into your browser. You say, I'm going to go to google.com. Okay. Your computer then sends a connection request to google.com. Google.com then translates, like you do what's called a domain registry lookup. So, a name server lookup. And you're going to take the domain that you typed in, then your computer will interact with the internet at large. It will try to resolve the DNS for this domain. If it's successful, it will translate the domain into the registered IP for that website. So if you have Google's IP address is 8.8.8.8. So if you type in here, I'll show you. So I type in google.com. Bam, google.com comes up because I have a great internet connection and my DNS is working. But I can also type in 8.8.8.8. That brings up Google. It does say public DNS, but it's slightly different because the Google search engine is like pointed to a slightly different IP. But I mean, you get the idea. Like I can use the IP address if I know the specific IP address for the specific website I want to go to. I can use the IP address instead of using the domain name, and if I do that, it's going to be even faster than if I use the domain name because my computer doesn't need to ask the internet for what the domain actually is. That's a public IP address. Now, a private IP address is provided to you only by a router. If you have a modem and no router, you won't be able to get a private IP address. Private IP addresses are usually the range of them is based on the router. You can change it in your router if you have your own router. If you don't have your own router, you probably don't have access to it. Like if you rent a router from an ISP, then the ISP will control the router usually, and they might not let you even log into it. So the typical, like usually a router will have an IP range of 192.168.1. Hold on. 192.168.1. 2 to 254. And what does that even mean? I'm sorry. So what that means is all of your devices have an IP address. That's how they connect to the internet. So they have a public IP address, but all of your devices that are in your building have the same public IP address because that IP address is your router. Your router is the gateway to the internet. So when a computer tries to go to the internet, it goes through the router, and the router makes the request for the computer. Then, when that because the router is what's giving you the public IP address. Then, when the command comes back to the router then uses the private IP address that it assigned to find the device that made the request and give it back. So, if you have so here's my phone, right? My phone could have an IP at this is a bad example because mobile phones usually have an IPv6 address. But let's say that my phone has an IP of 192.168.1.4, right? And my computer that I'm currently working on has an IP address of 192.168.1.7. They're different. They will always be different. If you try and statically assign the same IP address to two devices, which you can do. You can statically choose the IP address that you want for your devices if you log in your router. And if you do that and you do the same IP address for two devices, the internet won't work on either one of those devices. But let's say this is 1.4 and this is 1.7. If I make a command with my phone and I say I want to go to dual links meta, then it will go to my router, even though it's not plugged into my router. It's wireless. It'll go through my router, and then my router will ask for dual links meta. Dual links meta will come back to my router, and then it will go to my phone, and it will go back to my router. Then my router will say which device was the one that asked me for this. 192.168.1.4. Okay, I'm going to send the dual links meta to that device, and then that's why that comes to my phone and not to my computer, even though they're both connected to the same router. Does that make sense? Now, modems do not have a private IP address, but that's why they only have one Ethernet port. So you can plug a modem, you can plug your computer into a modem. It'll work just fine, and it doesn't get a private IP address, but it doesn't need one because you're using the modem as a kind of like a direct bridge to the internet. So you type in a command, the modem will use its public IP address to make the request for you, and then it just hands the connection back to your device without even knowing what your device is. It doesn't need to because there's not multiple devices connected. A router has multiple devices connected, which is why you need a private IP address for it. Okay, that was a lot. All right, so now let's look up command prompts. Let's see. All right. We've talked about how the internet works. I'm almost out of time. Actually, you know what? I'm going to split this up because I'm out of time, basically. So that is an introduction to how the internet works. My next video will be an introduction into how to troubleshoot the internet if it does not work. Thank you all so much for watching. My name is Serafi, and I was thrilled to have all of you with me.